This video examines the tragic case of Katie Sepik, a bright young woman whose future was full of promise before her life was violently taken. Catherine J. Sepik, known to friends and family as Katie, grew up in Carlsbad, New Mexico, as the oldest of 3 children. She had recently completed her business degree at New Mexico State University and was preparing to continue her education by pursuing an MBA. At just 22 years old, Katie was described as ambitious, energetic, sharp-witted, and deeply charismatic. Her father, Dave, remembered her as someone who lived life at full speed, outspoken, bold, and driven from an early age. She loved being the center of activity, whether it meant entertaining her family, cheering passionately at sporting events, or organizing plans with friends. Katie had a playful sense of humor, often poking fun at herself while keeping others laughing. Those closest to her recalled that she embraced life as an adventure and rarely hesitated to take charge. During the summer of 2003, Katie was balancing multiple roles. She was working as a waitress, involved in sorority life, continuing her studies, and dating Joe Bischoff, whom she had been seeing for about 8 months. While the relationship had meaningful moments, it had also grown increasingly tense. Joe was planning to move far away to work in his family's business, while Katie was preparing for graduate school. The uncertainty surrounding their future had created strain between them. That Labor Day weekend, Katie chose to focus on enjoying time with friends. She, Joe, her roommate Tracy, and several others spent the night socializing, drinking, and moving between bars before attending a crowded neighborhood house party. Earlier footage from a local venue showed Katie and Joe appearing close and affectionate. However, tensions escalated later in the night after Katie witnessed Joe behaving intimately with another woman. A heated argument followed. Around 3 a.m., Katie left the party alone, visibly upset. She did not take her phone, keys, or purse, all of which remained behind. Her car stayed parked outside her home, suggesting she had walked the short distance on foot. When morning came and Katie still had not returned, concern quickly spread. Friends began calling hospitals and searching for any sign of her. As worry intensified, authorities were contacted and a missing person investigation began. What started as confusion soon evolved into something far darker, the opening chapter of a case that would shock an entire community. As the hours passed with no sign of Katie, anxiety hardened into fear. Tracy, her roommate, replayed the previous night repeatedly in her mind. Katie had left angry but not disoriented enough to simply disappear. Her belongings were still inside the house. Her car had not moved. None of it made sense. When officers arrived to begin their search, they noticed subtle but troubling details around the home. Near the back of the house, a sandal lay on the ground, separated from its pair. A window screen had been torn loose and the gravel beneath showed signs of disturbance, as if someone or something had been dragged across it. These were not details consistent with a voluntary disappearance. While investigators worked near the house, a separate discovery was made miles away, east of Las Cruces, in a remote desert area used as an informal dumping ground. A couple passing through the area noticed what appeared to be a human body partially concealed by the terrain. The woman had been left exposed in the open desert, her body positioned deliberately, her clothing incomplete. Burn marks covered parts of her back and shoulders, and tire impressions nearby suggested she had been transported there by vehicle. By the time Katie was officially reported missing later that day, the connection became unavoidable. Tracy was asked to come to the station, believing she might help identify someone connected to the investigation. She arrived expecting answers, or at worst, bad news that still held hope. Instead, she was confronted with the reality no one had been prepared for. The body recovered in the desert was Katie. The autopsy revealed the extent of the violence inflicted upon her. Katie had been strangled, and evidence showed she had fought desperately before dying. Traces of blood and DNA were found beneath her fingernails, indicating she had resisted her attacker. The burns on her body suggested an attempt had been made to destroy evidence, but the fire had not fully taken hold. Investigators concluded that Katie had not been killed at the location where she was found. She had been attacked elsewhere, then transported and discarded in the desert. Several personal items were missing, including her watch and rings. One particularly haunting detail deeply unsettled everyone involved. Katie's family explained that she had always struggled to project her voice. Even as a child, she could barely shout above a whisper. The idea that she may have tried to scream for help, and physically could not, haunted those who loved her. Despite the brutality of the crime, the DNA recovered from the scene did not immediately match anyone in existing databases. With no clear suspect, investigators were forced to retrace Katie's final hours, beginning with the people closest to her. Attention turned back to the party, the argument, and the last people who had seen her alive. Investigators began rebuilding the final timeline of Katie's night, starting with the house party and the people who had been there. More than 30 guests had passed through the home, but only a handful had interacted closely with Katie in the hours before she disappeared. Detectives focused on interviews with friends, witnesses, and especially Joe Bischoff, her boyfriend at the time. Joe described their relationship as serious, despite recent tension. He told investigators that he had imagined a future with Katie, marriage, children, a life together, even though their plans were pulling them in different directions. He initially downplayed the argument at the party, presenting the night as nothing more than alcohol-fueled confusion. However, inconsistencies quickly emerged. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Joe and Katie had argued publicly after she saw him kissing another woman. Others recalled Katie leaving the party visibly upset. Joe had not volunteered this information during his first conversations with police. Another detail raised eyebrows. Of all the people present that night, Joe was the only one who declined to provide a DNA sample when asked. While refusing was within his rights, it immediately set him apart from everyone else. Combined with his incomplete account of the argument, suspicion began to build. Friends also told investigators that Joe appeared to have Katie's phone, keys, and purse in his possession later that morning. He had attempted to call her multiple times, despite knowing she had left without those items. To detectives, this raised an unsettling question. If he believed she was safe at home, why the urgency? Within days of Katie's death, Joe left town and returned to his family's home several hours away. When investigators requested a follow-up interview, they were informed that Joe would not be returning. His family had hired an attorney, and from that point forward, all communication ceased. To the police, it appeared as though Joe was emotionally distancing himself from the case. He had expressed devastation in early conversations, claiming he could not live without Katie, yet his refusal to cooperate stalled progress at a critical stage. Without probable cause, detectives were unable to compel his return or obtain a DNA sample. Katie's family was conflicted. They had always believed Joe cared deeply for her. While investigators followed the evidence where it led, her parents struggled to accept that someone Katie trusted could be responsible. For them, the idea of a random attack still seemed more plausible. As weeks turned into months, frustration mounted. Time that could have been spent pursuing other leads had been lost. When Joe eventually did provide a DNA sample, it excluded him completely. He explained that fear, not guilt, had kept him silent, worried that his DNA would naturally be present because they had shared a bed. With Joe officially ruled out, the investigation was forced back to the beginning, and somewhere out there, Katie's killer remained free. With Joe eliminated as a suspect, investigators were left with a chilling reality. They were now searching for a stranger. The case lost its most obvious focus, and every assumption had to be questioned. Detectives revisited physical evidence, witness statements, and the crime scene itself, hoping something overlooked would point them forward. One element continued to trouble them: the method. Katie had been abducted, strangled, transported, and burned. This was not impulsive violence. It suggested escalation, intent, and a level of comfort with brutality that rarely appears for the first time in a single act. To seasoned investigators, it felt disturbingly familiar. Then, nearly 2 weeks after Katie's murder, news surfaced from hundreds of miles away. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, a 25-year-old woman survived a horrifying attack. After leaving a bar following an argument with her boyfriend, she was approached by 2 men who forced her into the back of a truck. She was driven to a remote rural area, assaulted, strangled, and doused with a flammable substance before being set on fire and left for dead. Against all odds, she survived. Her injuries were severe, but she was able to provide crucial details about her attackers and the vehicle they used. When investigators compared the Wisconsin case to Katie's murder, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Both victims had left bars late at night after relationship conflict. Both were abducted, strangled, transported by truck, and burned. The parallels were chilling. Sketches were created and released to the public. Not long after, a dairy farm manager recognized the faces immediately. 2 of his employees, Juan Nieto and Gregorio Morales, matched the descriptions. The men had fled town shortly after the attack, but Morales eventually returned. Working with police, the manager orchestrated a plan to obtain Morales's DNA. When the sample was tested, it confirmed his involvement in the Wisconsin attack. Morales was convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Nieto later accepted a plea deal and received a 70-year sentence. For a brief moment, hope surged in New Mexico. But that hope collapsed when neither man's DNA matched the evidence from Katie's case. Once again, investigators were left with nothing. 2 years passed. Katie's murder grew colder, the trail fainter. Leads dried up. The case settled into an uneasy silence, unresolved, unanswered, and unbearably heavy for those who refused to let her name fade. And then, unexpectedly, the case took a turn no one had anticipated. Nearly 9 weeks after Katie's murder, fear resurfaced in the same student community. Late one night, a man armed with a knife forced his way into an apartment shared by 2 New Mexico State University students. The intrusion was sudden and violent. The women hid, terrified, as officers rushed to the scene and arrested the suspect before anyone was killed. The man was identified as Gabriel Avila, a 23-year-old local resident. Investigators learned that he had been seen before, lingering near student housing, watching windows, memorizing routines. Despite the seriousness of the crime, Gabriel was released on bond. He claimed he needed time to get his affairs in order. Instead, he disappeared. Gabriel fled to Mexico, evading authorities for years. In 2005, he attempted to re-enter the United States and was captured. He was later convicted of aggravated burglary with intent to commit aggravated assault and sentenced to prison. As part of routine procedure, Gabriel was required to provide a DNA sample. That sample changed everything. When his DNA was entered into the system, it produced a match to evidence recovered from Katie's murder scene. Detectives in Las Cruces were stunned. Gabriel's name had never appeared in their investigation. No one in Katie's social circle recognized him. There had been no known connection between them. As police dug deeper, more pieces fell into place. Gabriel's ex-wife contacted authorities after discovering a ring in his old truck, a ring she did not recognize. It was later identified as one of Katie's missing belongings. She also provided information about the vehicle Gabriel had owned at the time of the murder. Though the truck had been sold, investigators were able to track it down. The tires had been changed, but the originals were still available. They matched the tire impressions found near Katie's body. Before the case could go to trial, Gabriel confessed. He told investigators that in the early morning hours, after leaving a drug dealer's house, he nearly struck Katie with his truck. When he stopped, she refused his offer of a ride, saying she was close to home. Minutes later, he saw her again, struggling to enter her house through a window because she had left without her belongings. That was when he attacked. Gabriel admitted to strangling Katie, loading her into his truck and disposing of her body in the desert in an attempt to erase evidence. Investigators later said that if Katie had left the party even moments earlier or later, she may never have crossed paths with him at all. Sometimes justice hinges on seconds. Gabriel Avila was formally charged the day after Christmas, a date that carried a cruel weight for Katie's family. That day marked what would have been her 26th birthday. After years of uncertainty, grief, and unanswered questions, authorities finally had the person responsible for her death in custody. The district attorney made it clear from the beginning that there would be no bargaining away responsibility. The evidence was overwhelming, and the state was prepared to take the case to trial. Gabriel and his legal team were fully aware that the likelihood of acquittal was virtually non-existent. In May of 2007, Gabriel entered a guilty plea to first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. Standing before the court, he claimed he did not fully understand why he had committed the crime. He expressed remorse and offered an apology to Katie's family. For them, the words changed nothing. Katie's father later said that while he heard regret in Gabriel's voice, it did not restore what had been taken. Her mother explained that forgiveness, for her, was not about the man who killed her daughter, but about finding a way to continue living without being consumed by hatred. Gabriel was sentenced to 69 years in prison. He will not be eligible for parole until 2043, after serving 3 decades behind bars.